everyone, and welcome to the PHILLIP Show. Grab your tea. I'm drinking tea this morning. It's normally coffee, but I think I've had too much. Don't tell anybody. It's like, you know how you drink too much coffee and you're just buzzing around? Yeah, we're not doing that today. So I'm drinking tea. So listen, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were like, hey, PHILLIP, what book are you reading? And, I was like, well, must we hurt one another? Because I don't really read books anymore because everything is so digital. And as a designer, I enjoy the jacket covers. I'll buy a lot of books, but I don't necessarily read them. So that's just between us. But I'm so interested to know in the culture now, with everything is so digital and everything is so immediate, and we can just do everything just right on a tablet, right on our phone. What's happening to the world of books? What's happening to the world of, literary work? Do people still go to bookstores? What about writers? What are they doing? Well, today we have an amazing writer here with us today, and her work has appeared in Beacon Street Review, Bellowing Arc, Chicago Quarterly Review, Cream City Review, and so many more. Her debut novel, Tinfoil Butterfly, was longlisted for the Center for Fiction's First Novel Prize and nominated for both a Shirley Jackson Award and a Bram Stoker, and has just released a new project entitled The Insatiable Volt Sisters. Insatiable Volt. See, that's why I need a coffee to kind of get those syllables together. Please help me welcome author, artist, educator, Rachel Eve Moulton. Rachel.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm having coffee still. I have not had enough or too much yet, so I'm working on it. I'm hoping for too much.
Yeah, I think I need to go back to too much because I can't even say words at this point. So
you're doing fine.
Tea is my tea ain't loyal. My tea. So where are you now? It looks so bright and so airy where you are. Where are you?
Oh, it's beautiful here. We live in New Mexico, outside of Albuquerque in the mountains. So the sun is out almost all the time, which I love.
Yeah.
And the mornings are nice and cool. I've got a sweater on, and then soon it'll be hot.
Oh, got you. Now you said we. Who's we?
Oh, we. I live with my family and my two daughters, Violet and Amelia, and my spouse, Dan. And we live up here with 2 dogs and 2 cats.
Wow. 2 dogs, 2 cats, and an entire family. And in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, you're not from New Mexico. How did you get there?
So we are actually from Yellow Springs, Ohio, where I grew up, and started, how did we get here? Started in education. When I graduated from Emerson, I got an MFA in creative writing and went back and got to teach at Antioch College for a couple of years.
Okay.
And knew that I wanted to be a teacher, but wasn't sure I wanted to do the academic game where you have to move around and, take jobs wherever you can get them. So I started working in private schools and teaching English for 9th graders mostly, but 9 through 12. And then I ended up following that career for a while. I was an administrator. We moved to Rhode Island because of my job. And then from Rhode Island, my spouse went to school in New Mexico and he got a job here. And I sold a book. I sold Tinfoil Butterfly. And so I was like, you know what? Let's ditch. Let's move someplace sunny and give more time to my writing and my art. And so here we are.
How did you go from, and that's so awesome. It's like, okay, insert New Mexico and sun and all of that. I love it. I just love it.
It's so good. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were an educator and, you're progressing there. How did you decide, and now I'm a writer? Or were you always a writer and just said, I'm going to release this? How did you make that decision?
Well, I went to a small private school in Yellow Springs, Ohio as a kid called the Antioch School. And when I was there, they really provided a lot of space for imagination and reading. And I remember very clearly at the time I was in 4th grade. So my teacher was Bill Mullins. And we were going around announcing what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I said very clearly, I'm going to be a writer and I'm going to be a teacher.
Wow.
And that's just kind of where I stayed. I found growing up in a small artistic community was really wonderful for being a writer. I had lots and lots of mentors in that town. And so was always writing, always, and went to Antioch College and then Emerson And, the teaching part of that came in too, and kind of took the forefront in a lot of ways because I was good at that. And so that career took off, and I was always writing in the background. And so then New Mexico and selling of tinfoil gave me a chance to flip that and put the writing at the forefront and the teaching and editing at the background, which is crazy.
That's tell me about tinfoil first. Before you tell me about tinfoil, what genre of a writer? Do you pick a genre, or do you just write and all of a sudden one might be fiction, one might be scary? Like, where are you at?
You really pick a genre because of marketing, of trying to sell. So ultimately you're crafting something that you're going to hopefully somebody's going to make money off of. I mean, that's just the crude part of it. And so part of what happened for me is I didn't really identify as a horror writer, even though I loved the genre. And so when I came to sell tinfoil, when it came time and I found an editor I liked, she was like, what if this is horror? How are you going to feel about that if that's how I market it? And she actually said feminist horror, which made me very happy. It gave it that little literary edge in my mind. So I was like, okay, let's do it. And once that kind of was decided upon, I feel like my writing has really found its stride. I have a really, I think, big imagination. And so being allowed to call it something, to call it horror, has been really helpful to me. And then, of course, you're trying to find your people, find who else writes in the genre. You have to do all these comparisons, these comps. And so figuring out what group you're in is helpful in that way. I think it can be really restrictive too. Genre writing is often looked down on, so it's not as prestigious. It's not going to win the Pulitzer like Barbara Kingsolver, or that's the feeling. So that can be complicated, but it is a genre right now that's really blowing up, and there's so many cool people working in it and exploring the tropes that were there before. So you get a lot of cool things happening and people talking about really important social issues in an authentic way. And I love that part of it.
Why do you think that genre why are people so interested in it right now? Like, why would people?
I don't know. There's lots of ways to answer that question probably, but I do think, so like, gosh, I don't know how articulate I'll be about this, but I think if you look back, I have my older daughter who is 14, just turned 14, is really interested in making film. She recently kind of won this prize. It's called the New Mexico Film Festival, and she won for best thriller. So she's getting into it, and that gives me license to start watching these old films again and getting really into it, which is super fun to do it with her. But you look back at these, films with the final girls, and me trying to talk to her about what those themes were, like you're looking at these movies and there's the sexism, the homophobia, the racism. You're like, oh, great. So there was this whole, like, the woman needs to be saved. Everybody's white. Like, there was all this stuff happening that she's like, what is this about? Like, it's absurd to her. So
because it's like two different times. It's
a
totally different era. They're like,
She's like, why is that woman's shirt off? And I'm like, well, you got to have boobies. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
So we're having these cool conversations, and then we get to watch things like Jordan Peele, who's doing Get Out and Nope, and having these really good stories with characters that have so many layers and draw from the history of this country. And so it's really, I don't know, I guess my point is it's really fun to write in horror, because all of a sudden you get to take this thing that was a little flat and really blow it up. And I think a lot of people are doing that. There's a movie we watched recently that's new called Barbarian.
Okay.
I'm going to forget the lead. She's amazing. But Justin Long is in it. That's the name I know. And again, just digging in to this kind of genre and using it to show more realistic, complicated scenarios.
Now, are you a movie watcher?
I love movies. Love. So I read and I watch way too many movies. Read too many books, watch too many movies. That's it.
Have you ever thought about being a filmmaker, or did you always, were you just kind of like, I'm just going to write it down?
I always wanted to write it down. It's fun because Violet wants to direct, and so it's fun to talk about those things in that way. And then, I grew up next door to, Julia Reichert and Steve Bognar, so documentary filmmakers. So I always had access to that. I helped on films sometimes or would evaluate, but writing a novel, writing short stories, fiction has always been my thing.
Yeah. So tell me about your newest book, The Insatiable Volt Sisters.
Nice.
Tell us about that. What's that all about?
So I was really interested. Usually my writing comes from an obsession with a place. So for Tinfoil, I had traveled to South Dakota, and I'd been in the Black Hills and the Badlands and became kind of obsessed with that space. Insatiable Volt Sisters is based on an island in Lake Erie called Kelly's Island. I call it Fowler Island in the book. And again, I had been to this little weird island where I kind of became obsessed with the space. It feels a space that feels haunted to me or layered or has a lot of history. And I like to then come up with that. That's why I'm a fiction writer, kind of come up with that history and infuse it in the place, come up with characters, what happened, what's going on. So the Volt Sisters is based on that sense of place, kind of a small town. And having grown up in Yellow Springs, this may explain my obsession.
Yeah.
A small little town, isolated, with a set group of people. And the sisters, Beatrice and Henrietta, have been raised on this island. And they are connected to the families that kind of created the downtown, own half the island. And so it's really their story. And how at, a certain age in their teens, their parents decide to divorce. And one sister is taken off island and the other stays. And so it's about that trauma of separation, not really understanding the history or origin of your family fully, but knowing there's a lot to know. And then when their father passes away, they come back to the island to deal with that and start to uncover kind of the harm that they've done to each other, the harm that's been done to them, the history of the island, figuring out, things that we don't talk about, and the way that we've, maybe missed opportunities to be cared for as well.
Now, how long did that project take you to write?
It's a good question. Originally, a long time ago, it was a short story. So it started with that and then went away for a long time. Wasn't a great short story and just kind of sat. And then I started working on it again in earnest after moving here. So it probably took 3 years. I mean, it takes a certain amount of time to get a full draft. And we talk about it. Am I allowed to curse? Can I curse?
I'll bleep it out, but go ahead.
A first draft is what we call it. It takes a while to get that done. And then from there, if you're lucky enough to have an editor, they go through it, give you advice. So there's a lot of back and forth that happens there too. And then once you and your editor agree that the book is done, it takes another year of covers and copy editing and all the other things, marketing that go into bringing it out. So what year is it? 2023?
Look, I had to think about it.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
So probably 2019 to 2020. Well, yeah, 3 years. Probably 3 years in earnest. Yeah.
Wow. I think that people underestimate. The time it takes, the process.
Yes.
And by people, I think me. I just underestimate it. I think people just sit and write, like you see it in the movies. People just sit, write, and all of a sudden they're turning in their manuscript to, their editor, and then they're with the publicist, and now they're on a book tour. And all that happened in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So I think that the process is so interesting, and I like when you said the marketing and all of that, because all of these are different components that take time and development.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things that I want to know, you said one of the names was Beatrice. What was the other name? Henrietta. So where do you come up with the names of, I've always wondered this in movies as well as books, where do you get the names? And is there any method to saying this is the name for this character?
I think that's a great question, actually. What happens is a little random. With Henrietta and Beatrice, like I said, I think I wrote a short story with them in it probably in 2002. And I remember being told at the time, nobody's named Beatrice and Henrietta. Those are horrible names. Now, in between then and 2020, there's been, the names come and go. So now there are people named that again. Nobody questions it at all. They think they're great. They're not old. They're old fashioned in a good way instead of a bad way. So names definitely evolve. Same with my children. We named them Violet and Amelia. And I think Amelia turned out to be the most popular name that year, but I didn't know anyone really named Amelia. So there's kind of that. You're kind of looking for something unique. And sometimes I get online and I just look at baby names to come up with for characters and I search those. Often it'll just kind of be a name that sticks and you go with it.
Yeah.
And becomes that person really easily. My main character in Tinfoil Butterfly is Emma. And again, I think I just liked the name at the time and it wasn't common to me at the time. And
my grandmother's name was Beatrice.
Oh, nice. See, it is old fashioned.
Yeah. It's definitely like a classic. And, you think of either old fashioned or a period of time gone by.
Correct.
It's a more mature name, but that's really interesting. I've always wondered how people, I didn't know if it was like a period piece or what have you.
Well, go ahead. Sorry.
No. You said you what?
I definitely wanted with these two characters, there's like this whole family legacy on this island. So like, decades, century of kind of this history of this family. And so I did want however you want to say it, more old-fashioned names to these very contemporary young women who are very fierce and current in their own way.
Yeah.
Also tied to this history. So that was
No, that makes perfect sense. And it fits really well because it kind of does get that, legacy.
Yeah.
Like, I bet this was somebody's name back in the lineage somewhere.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. When as a writer, and I opened up the show talking about things going digital and a lot of things being so immediate, they're in the palm of our hands, some bookstores are closing. What are you seeing as far as from your perspective as a writer? And I guess what has changed and what do you see happening moving forward? What do you hope to see?
So I think because I went to grad school, so I graduated from Emerson in 2000. And at that time, you really were trying to publish some short stories. Like if you were trying to be on the track that I'm on, publish some short stories in literary magazines. And those were print, right? You held those, they got mailed to you. And then you were trying to get to an agent and an editor, just as you would now. But the hope would be then you'd be doing a tour, you'd be going to bookstores, you'd be kind of out there doing readings, all of those things. So those things are still true, but the literary magazines are online. I used to go to the post office with like a stack of manila envelopes that you were submitting. It was kind of expensive, to be honest, because then you had to have a return envelope so they could reject you properly. All these things were happening, and now it's on email, right? So it's very fast. Cheaper. Same with submitting novels, right? You can just do a query letter and you can do your first 20 pages over email. So that stuff is really nice. In terms of selling and marketing the book, I think there are fewer bookstore events. I did one in Yellow Springs. I did two here. And you're doing those they're fun. You get to celebrate. You get to see people and thank people. And be out there a little bit, but I don't know that it sells a ton of books anymore. And so most of that work is done online, a lot of podcasts, a lot of shows like this, kind of getting your name out there and talking about what you do rather than bookstore readings, which was my kind of romantic idea about what would happen.
Right. So how do you think it's going to change in the future? And how have you kind of you talked about it a little bit, but what else do you have to do to kind of pivot and say, okay, so to push sales, more podcasts, or is it more, what does that even look like?
I think a lot of it is, like one of the things that I'm so lucky is that I'm with a big publisher. And they have people who explore all these ideas and try. So when Tinfoil came out, I did something on Reddit. I wrote some articles for like LitHub. So there's different ways they're constantly experimenting with to get information out there. One of the best things that happened with this book is that I got interviewed by Aisha Raskow on Weekend Edition, which, you know, is more of an old school method, if you will, but she's so wonderful. It was wonderful. But so those things are still happening, but they're constantly kind of exploring how to get the word out there, how to use social media. I mean, there's a couple things too. Like, again, when I was first trying to do all this and didn't sell a book right away, there was a real sense that you had to have a website, you had to have a social media presence, you had to have all these things. And I think that's still true. I think those are good things to have. But in the end, it comes down to, do you have a book with a message and a voice that is going to sell right now, right? And so having that first is still the most important thing. And then experimenting with the ways you can reach the most people to get a hold of that story. It's an interesting process, and I'm really glad I have help with it. A lot of people that I work with, and just people in general, will do the self-publishing route, which is also awesome, or a small press. However you can get your story out there, but it is a lot more work because you don't have people who are experts helping you find your way through it.
What is the hardest thing for you with your family? You know, you have your family, you're in New Mexico, you did a lot of traveling, you were in a lot of different places, you were writing, and then you got settled. As a writer, what is the hardest thing for you when it comes to tackling a new project?
I think the hardest thing is always having faith that something will come of it, right? So, for example, even if you start a novel's a big project. So if you start it, even in a scenario where it never comes to fruition for some reason, it's still going to lead to something else. So you're still going after whatever project because you want to learn something, because you want to grow, because you want to get to the next moment, whatever it is. And so having that faith that you're not wasting your time, especially with writing or art of any kind, because you're not getting paid necessarily for it, right? So even though I've had 2 books purchased, which is amazing to be paid for your art, you still are writing the 3rd, not knowing if somebody's going to buy it. So like having that faith that this is a good experience, it's a worthy experience, it could come to fruition, all that stuff sometimes feels wonderful, sometimes feels narcissistic. You know, you could be cleaning your house would seem more productive than sitting, you know, eating a piece of toast and having angst about whether or not what you're doing is going to work out, right? So there's a lot of that kind of labor that looks ridiculous. So when my children are home, I don't look like I'm working very hard because I'm kind of wandering around. Sometimes I'm typing, sometimes I'm lying on the floor. So it's a little hard probably to witness, and sometimes it's hard to justify. Sometimes it involves going on a hike, and that's when I'm working. So I'm learning as I go through this that is actually legitimate. It is all part of the process. I'm not making it up. And so I'm gaining confidence as I go. But that stuff can be really hard.
Yeah, I bet it's not traditional. You know, it's just not traditional. You don't have points of immediate completion when, you know, like, I guess as somebody in marketing, I can say, okay, I'm done with this project. Now I'll move on to the next. When you come in, you see me doing this, and I can say, that's it. And your process is very fluid, and the creative process looks different, maybe with every different mood.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You try to have, I've also learned that you want to have different things going on all at once. So I work with a lot of other writers. I am a writing coach. I edit their work. And send feedback. So I've got that going on. So I can always be in the field, even if I'm not working on my own stuff. And then I try to have a project I'm starting. So a blank page, whatever that looks like. I need to be generating words. And then another project that needs some revision of my own. So like, depending on my headspace, I can work on something. Right. So I never have to feel like I've totally failed that day, because there's something going on that I could dig into. Reading a book that I need to know about for my genre. or going on a hike because I'm stuck on an idea. So trying to find ways where I can always come to my desk or wherever it is in the house and start working on something. That has been really helpful.
Would you consider yourself a successful author?
Depends on the day.
Yeah.
I think that that fourth grade girl who was like, I'm going to be a teacher and I'm going to be a writer. Absolutely. She would be thrilled. She would be thrilled. As an ambitious person who has stories to tell, I'm always like, okay, I want to do, the next book has to be better. It has to reach more people, or it has, there's always challenges you're setting for yourself. Hopefully most of them are healthy. But yeah, so I think I feel pretty great about it, to be honest, I guess. In general, I feel like this is where I've always kind of wanted to be. And while there are things to still achieve or things that I wish were different, it's definitely ideal. I'm sitting in my home office. I have paid work to do today. I have unpaid work to do today. The sun is out. It's pretty great.
Yeah, it sounds great. I mean, I'm not, it sounds wonderful in the Albuquerque and the New Mexico and the sun. Yeah. So you referenced the younger you, and I'm sure that there are going to be some younger people watching, but also maybe some younger people in their journey, maybe not age, but in their journey. With what you've discovered about your journey and how you've grown, what advice would you give a younger person starting out?
You have to engage with story as much as you can. Read as many books, watch as many movies as you can get a hold of, and just constantly do that work. And then the biggest thing is, if this is part of who you are, you just keep after it, and eventually you'll find a place for your stories. I mean, I think rejection in the arts is constant, and if you can weather that and keep after it and keep getting better, your work is going to find a home. I think the first draft of Tinfoil Butterfly was my graduate thesis. And at the time I sent it out and I got lovely. There's like the tiny, like, no, thank you rejection. Then there's the friendly rejection. Like, this is really good, but we're not going to take it. So I was kind of at that level with it. And then it took another 15 years. I revised it different, the Me Too movement had happened, all kinds of things had changed, and it sold like that.
Wow.
So you just don't get discouraged. And if you get discouraged and it doesn't feel like the right thing for you to do and it's too much, then move on to something else. But for me, it was never an option. I could do other things. I could be successful in other ways, but this was always going to be part of who I was. And so pretending it wasn't would have been stupid. So you just keep at it.
Yeah, keep at it. I remember you saying that when they asked you what you wanted to do, basically you're doing it.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and that's incredible. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being here, giving us some insight into your process, into you, into what you've been doing. For people who are at home, where can they find all of your work?
I have a website, rachelevemoulton.com. That'll give you a good starting place. There are lots of wonderful, still not as many as a while back, but there are a lot of independent bookstores coming back. Barnes & Noble actually is a great place to find. They've got a great horror section. So looking at all those resources, going online, it's all there.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing more of the horror of it all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah.
So that's Rachel. What an inspiring thing to be asked when you're younger what you want to do, and to know so clearly what that is, but to see it come to fruition even as you get older. And some people's journeys aren't kind of that straight line, and that's totally okay. Rachel gave us some really great nuggets to kind of take away. Stay consistent, stay passionate, and even change directions if you see that there's something inside of you that kind of wants to change course. But the main goal is to find your passion, be consistent, and know that you can do it. So thank you to Rachel Moulton. Make sure that you check out all of her work. And as usual, you are the best you in the world. And I'll see you next time here on The PHILLIP Show.
Don't